Hello constant readers, my name is Emily, and today I'm going to talk about the Dark Tower series. This is the first episode in my #DT Project 17, where I'm going to talk about the experience of reading some of the literature that went into inspiring Stephen King's Dark Tower series, at least in terms of the title. So, for this project, two things. One, I don't care about authorial intentions. I know King is very famous for going back and reflecting on his works and giving us more information, introductions, forewords. I don't really care about that. As an academic, the text has to stand by itself. Very rarely in academia do we do biographical readings, and that is no exception here. I am going to be looking at this text as it stands alone, as it works within the fantastic genre, how it plays with, subverts, adds to the genre as a whole. The second thing is that I am using this text as a framing for this series. I feel like titles are important. I am using the poem to bookend my reading of the series. So because the Dark Tower series draws its title from Robert Browning's poem, Childe Roland, A Dark Tower Came, I am interested in looking at the literary history behind this title. That is what I'm going to talk about in today's video. Who is Childe Roland? Where did it come from? And how does that affect my reading moving forward? So Childe Roland, the story of Childe Roland is actually a fairy tale. It's an oral story. It's part of Arthurian legend. It overlaps with Arthurian legend. And its most famous retelling, its most well-known retelling, should I say, was done by Joseph Jacobs in 1890. Which actually comes after Robert Browning's poem Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came in 1855. What Joseph Jacob actually did was introduce the term Dark Tower to this Arthurian legend, this fairy tale, for the first time because he was inspired by Shakespeare and Browning before him. This fairy tale itself, it's the story of four siblings, four royal siblings, and sometimes the queen is Queen Guinevere, sometimes it's not. So there are four children: Childe Roland, the youngest, two elder brothers, and a sister called Burd Ellen. And the four of them are playing ball, and Roland kicks the ball over the church, and his sister Burd Ellen goes to retrieve it. And when she goes to retrieve it, she walks widdershins around the church, or contrary to the way the sun moves around the church, and she disappears. And everybody's very upset. Everybody's sad that their sisters disappeared. Roland goes to Merlin and asks what happened, like, where did my sister go? Because Merlin is, of course, this magician figure in Arthurian legend. Merlin is the guy to go to in Arthurian legend when magical stuff happens. So Roland goes to him, and Merlin tells him that his sister was taken by the Elf King. In Jacob's version, she was taken to the Dark Tower of the Elf King. So Jacob introduces the idea of the Dark Tower, but before that it was just into this magical fairy tale land. Merlin also says that only the bravest knight can go and retrieve the sister. So of course Roland's eldest brother attempts this quest first, and he goes widdershids around the church and he disappears and he never comes back. And then the middle brother goes and he tries to save his siblings, and he goes widdershins around the church and he never comes back. And then, because fairy tales like threes, Roland, Childe Roland, the youngest brother, an important piece to know here is that Childe, C-H-I-L-D-E, in medieval literature refers to an untested knight. Roland is this untested knight. He's the last to go on this quest, and so in preparation, Merlin gives him two rules. First, cut the head off of everybody you meet, and second, don't eat or drink anything in this other world. So, of course, Merlin goes widdershins around the church, and he enters into this other world, and he beheads everybody he meets except for a henwife. And the henwife tells him that to find the Dark Tower, to find the Elf King, he has to walk 3 times around a hill chanting, open door, and let me come in." So, of course, Roland does this. He enters into the Elf King's palace, and he finds his sister there enchanted. And so he's chatting with his sister about, "Hey, I've come to rescue you." And she's like, "You dummy, nobody gets out of here alive." And then, for reasons, Roland forgets that he's not allowed to eat and drink anything, and so he asks his sister for some food, and because she's enchanted, she can't warn him not to eat it. Right at the last minute, he remembers that he's not allowed to eat or drink anything, and he drops the food, and the Elf King comes out, and they have this battle, and Roland, being noble and having this awesome sword from Merlin and his father, beats the Elf King into submission, and he takes mercy on him if the Elf King will release his brothers from the Dark Tower prison and his sister. So the Elf King agrees, and they all go home, and the moral of the story is to not walk widdershins around a church. This fairy tale that sort of exists in oral narrative gets incorporated into King Lear by Shakespeare. There is a character called Edgar who is in disguise as a madman, and to lend legitimacy to his madness, he sort of spouts off this fairy tale line. Childe Roland to the Dark Tower came, his world was still, fi fo fum, I smell the blood of a British man. That is from Act 3, Scene 4 of King Lear. Robert Browning picks up on the line of this madman and turns this imagery, this idea of this mad quest of an untrained knight, and writes a poem about it, and that is Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came. Scholars have different interpretations of that poem, whether it's Browning's reflection on life as a soldier who now sees the world as tainted and ugly, whether it's just the story of a knightly quest, whether it's realizing that success only comes through failure or the futility of life. So what does this literary baggage and looking into this literary baggage do for me as a reader? Having Roland be this character that is rooted in Arthurian legend, rooted in fairy tale, means for me that Roland is steeped in expectation. I am reading Roland the Gunslinger as this untested knight who's going on this quest, who's journeying to earn his title. I expect Roland to experience massive character growth, massive personal development. I expect this to be a Bildungsroman for Roland the Gunslinger. So another expectation that I have with the fairy tale roots, the idea of walking widdershins and ending up in a parallel universe that exists close to your own. Even Robert Browning's poem is set in this sort of pessimistic, ugly, wasted, perhaps mirror image of our own world. That struggle between hope and despair that we see throughout Browning's poem, and that sort of negative view of the world, I expect to see perhaps in this parallel universe where we see the gunslinger existing, so that we don't have this fantastic realm entirely by itself, but that the fantastic lies just parallel, like just slightly off kilter from our own reality. I have the expectation that this will be a fantasy story. I know King, as a horror writer, is under the umbrella of the fantastic. Fantasy as a genre, very simply defined by Tolkien, is any secondary world where unnatural, unreal things can happen within the context of that world. Because it's internally consistent, we're never booted back into our primary existence. By that definition, much of King's writing exists in its own secondary fantastic world. A lot of the horror genre stuff exists in this secondary world. We're never, well, at least for the most part, unless you're like me and the supernatural goes a little bit too far, you never get booted back into the primary world. When the horror is working, you exist in this secondary world. So King's horror writing in general fits under the umbrella term of the fantastic. Throughout history of the fantasy genre, horror ends up sort of getting woven back in and then sort of meandering its way out of this genre braid, if we want to think of it like that. Seeing the poem and the fairy tale history of Childe Roland, I have this expectation that King is now taking his experience as a horror writer and weaving himself back into the fantasy genre proper. I have this expectation that he's really going to work within the traditional limits of the fantastic, of fantasy. Obviously, because I can't remember The Gunslinger and I haven't read the rest of the series, this is my first time really experiencing this as an adult. I have no idea where this is going, but I wanted to record my predictions, my anticipations of the series right off the bat, so that I can reflect on this when I get to the end of the series and I reread the poem. Thank you for listening, constant readers. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Keep in mind to be spoiler friendly because, like I just said, I haven't read The Gunslinger. I haven't read the rest of the series, and I really would like to experience it sort of organically for the first time. There will be links to our Goodreads discussion group in the comments down below. If you want to start spoilery discussions, I invite you to do so there, and just clearly mark, like right at the top of your post, spoilers, so that you guys who have read the series can chat and get into the meatier things that I haven't yet got to. Be sure to tag me in all of your social media posts with the hashtag DTProject17. I have been really enjoying seeing the things that you've tagged me in thus far. It's really great to interact with you guys and see where you're at with reading the series, to see you get excited about collecting new editions of the series, picking up the series for the first time, finding the pretty new releases. It's been really fun, and so I would love for you to continue to include me in your journey throughout the hashtag DTProject17. I will see you very soon with my thoughts on The Little Sisters of Eluria, which I am reading before I move into The Gunslinger and the series proper, just because I was told it was a good place to warm up. It's a nice place to start to get into the world. Be sure to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe if you want to keep track of this Dark Tower project. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye!